Greetings. This is Typhon Blue with a new installment of VLeaks, VLeaks 1.1, Domestication of the Human Male. In VLeaks 1.0, Feminine Surrender as Emotional Dominance, I detailed how women use submission as a way of developing dominance in their relationships. Two proponents of the surrendered wife lifestyle weighed in to defend the dynamic. I will be addressing their criticisms in this vlog, as well as expanding on some of the concepts in the original.
When the draft horse asks, "Why am I plowing the farmer's field?" the farmer might answer, "Because you're stronger than me, of course." The draft horse identity then becomes a self-reinforcing solipsism based on the farmer's flattering deception. I plow the farmer's field because I'm stronger than the farmer. I'm stronger than the farmer because I plow the farmer's field. A wild horse would have none of this. A wild horse would simply be, his identity defined only by what experiences he chooses to have. It's not until a horse's definition of himself can only be expressed in terms of the farmer that he becomes domesticated. The horse is stronger, faster, smarter than the farmer, but always he is judged in relation to the farmer's limitation. And because this judgment is the domesticated horse's identity, the farmer's limitations become the horse's obligations. When the farmer is weak, the horse must show himself to be stronger and pull her plow for her. When the farmer is slow, the horse must show himself to be faster and carry her upon his back. When the farmer is stupid, the horse must show himself to be smarter and solve her problems for her. In each instance, the horse's strengths are used to benefit the farmer in her weakness, and tying the horse's positive identity in opposition to her weakness, she tethers his efforts to her benefit as well. The draft horse then sees thoughts of freedom, or any aspect of his wild horse nature that does not relate to plowing fields, as a threat to his own identity. Finally, because the draft horse believes plowing fields to be his identity, he no longer sees the transactional nature of his relationship with the farmer. He starts to see her taking care of him as a benefit, rather than an aspect of her exploitation of him. In his mind, she takes care of him because she loves him, not because he's a utility that requires maintenance. A farmer does not bother to make herself aware of her draft horse's emotional needs. If she did, she would have to face the fact that the entirety of the draft horse's life is constructed for the farmer's benefit, and her benefit alone. Regardless of how much extra mash she fetches for her horse, as he impatiently stamps his hoof in his stall. She might say to herself, "I feed him, muck out his stall, give him access to sex, and raise his young to be future draft horses. What more could he possibly need?" A wild animal will not allow the farmer to clean it, to feed it, to control its sex life, even if it's just deciding who the animal will have sex with, or even touch its young, much less raise them. A wild horse must be broken, then tamed, before it will even see the farmer's service as a benefit. A wild horse prefers its independence to dependence on the farmer. That's why the draft horse's young must be raised by the farmer's hand, so they too can learn to be dependent on the farmer's service, instead of independent and self-possessed wild creatures. So when the draft horse asks, "Why am I drafting the farmer's field?" and the farmer responds, "Because you are stronger than me, of course, dear," this is not an answer. It's a flattering deception. The greater strength of the horse is why the farmer has set him to draft her field, but the greater strength of the farmer is why the horse actually does it.
Because women control, and have controlled, the fundamentals of human survival for generations upon generations, children grow up associating feminine approval with provision of their basic needs. This association persists even into adulthood. As a boy grows into a man, his association between feminine approval and his basic needs evolves into associating feminine approval and a positive social identity. Needless to say, those entities we see as the source of our basic needs hold considerable power over us. Respect for men is now measured in terms of respecting the identities women give them, as draft horses, rather than respecting the needs of the men themselves. In fact, by setting up a man's personal needs in opposition to his socially approved identity as a draft horse, you create the perfect uncomplaining beast of burden. The biggest threat to this system is a man's emotional matrix, and the possibility he might imprint his emotional matrix on his children. Each man is the key to freedom for his sons. If a boy associates provision of his basic needs, food, shelter, comfort, with the presence of his father, he starts to develop an association between masculine approval and a positive social identity. Eventually, as he grows, this will allow him the ability to develop a positive male identity distinct from women, because his social identity will not be provisional on their approval. So, the reason why men's emotional needs are conflated with their base drives for food, sex, and hygiene, and their actual emotional needs are ignored and disguised behind respecting their manhood, is because this allows women's emotions to dominate the relationship, both her relationship with her husband and her relationship with her sons. Unlike the draft horse, who defines himself as stronger than the farmer, all the mechanics of men's domestication are hidden behind the word manhood. Because to admit to himself that he is controlled by the farmer would be admit to himself that he is weaker than the farmer. Domestication has become his identity. A commentator on the article Feminine Surrender as Emotional Dominance posted the following comment: I have to say that if a woman is claiming to be surrendered, or as I would call it, submissive, and yet she is manipulating her husband, she is nothing more than a hypocrite making Christianity look bad, and she doesn't have a clue about true biblical submission. First of all, the surrendered wife dynamic may play out to exclude the man's emotional needs from the relationship without the surrendered wife actually being aware of what she's doing. This is one reason why it's so dangerous. The commentator goes on to show this potential danger in action in her description of her own relationship. I homeschool our children, clean our house, make my family's meals, and happily have sex with my husband whenever he wants to. The real Christian meaning of surrender submission would be putting the needs of husband and family ahead of your own. I'm sorry to hear of these situations where women exploit men's goodness, but let's not call it something it's not. It's not surrender, submission, or Christian. First of all, I'll point out that she replies, and her primary reason is to defend the lifestyle, not to express concern over the men in this lifestyle who are being abused by it. But to move on, in essence, the surrendered wife is appealing to the carrot offered the man in the surrendered wife lifestyle to justify the lifestyle. Before I get into discussing this part of the response, I want to point out that I can only infer from what was written. It is difficult to describe the entirety of a relationship in a short paragraph, and no doubt information is lost in translation. Having said that, from this description, I don't get the impression that this surrendered wife has any idea that her husband has a human emotional landscape at all. First of all, she defined all of her husband's needs in exactly the same way a farmer would define her draft horses. You could replace what she said with, I feed him, muck out his stall, give him access to sex, and I raise his young to be future plow horses. And you would lose nothing in the meaning. The one thing that addresses a human emotional need is what she says about sex. Unfortunately, she does not recognize whose emotional needs are being met in her sexual exchanges with her husband. Access to sex is something you give a farm animal. Desire is something you give a human being. Desire is the gift, not the sex. So when her husband desires her, he's giving her a gift. In the situation she describes, it's actually her husband tending to her emotional needs as a human being, namely the need to feel desired. There was a reason why I explicitly referred to the intricate tapestry of a human's vulnerabilities, insecurities, and fears when I described men's needs. These vulnerabilities are the man's emotional matrix. In an equitable relationship, the man's emotional matrix is given as much room as the woman's. In an inequitable relationship, the man's emotional matrix is misunderstood as identical to his base needs, and the woman describes them exactly the same way as she would describe taking care of a plow horse. In an inequitable relationship, a woman provides exactly the same things that a farmer provides a well-performing animal. In an inequitable relationship, a woman mistakes providing for her own emotional needs with her providing for his. This carrot, like all carrots, is more about benefiting the person offering it than the one receiving it. To understand how the whip functions in the surrendered wife lifestyle, imagine it is, instead, a ring through a bull's nose. When the farmer tugs on the bull's ring, the bull experiences pain. She tugs on his ring either overtly through shaming language, "you're not strong enough," or covertly by presenting a weakness in herself that he must act to address or risk losing his positive social identity as stronger than her. Pointing out the existence of the ring is also painful because, being an obvious point of control and weakness, it challenges his identity as more powerful than the farmer. But when the farmer says, "Don't point out the existence of the ring to the bull, it insults him," what she means is, "Don't point out the ring to the bull, it interferes with my control over him if he's aware of it." And she's hiding this truth behind presumptive compassion for his fragile male ego. An online commentator using the handle Lilith had the following to say in defense of the surrendered wife lifestyle. The way the former commentator uses the carrot, Lilith uses the whip. And what about the man in the story? You paint him as a hapless, manipulated victim who is comically failing in his attempts to live up to the dominant male ideal that is not very well defined either, and usually a target of public ridicule and disgust. This is in reference to the previous article, Feminine Surrender as Emotional Dominance, in which I detail the story of a man whose surrendered wife sat silently by as he took an incorrect exit from the highway, allowing him to drive half a day before discovering his error. The surrendered wife in question could easily have said to herself, in line with what Lilith is saying, "I don't want to insult his role as head of the household by pointing out his error," and felt her decision entirely justified by the ideals of the surrendered wife lifestyle. After all, she is just respecting his role as head of the household by not questioning it. Likely most in the surrendered wife community would agree with her and regard any protest of abuse on the part of her husband as him not fulfilling his duty as head of the household, even if he thought to protest at all. Which brings us to an irony. Lilith uses the existence of the nose ring to justify why we shouldn't bring attention to the existence of nose rings. On my part, I will continue to point out the traps laid for men in these situations so that they can make their own decisions about what to do. If a man enters the surrendered wife lifestyle knowing the pitfalls and chooses it anyway, my responsibility ends at just informing him of what I see. Finally, since I don't believe that men's identities as men need to be predicated on anything to do with their relationship to women, either benefiting women or being stronger than women, I don't believe pointing out the dangers of these dynamics hold for men somehow reduces their manhood. If men aren't defined by women, then pointing this stuff out doesn't affect their manhood. Rather, I think it empowers them to start reclaiming their definition of manhood for themselves, which is probably the real issue that Lilith has here. If you can talk about your partner in the same terms a farmer would use to talk about taking care of a draft animal, then you do not even view your partner as human. Further, this explains the sinking sensation that a lot of men have, spoken about by W.F. Price in his post, "What's Wrong with Wanting Love?" that they are not loved. No. If your female partner talks about you in the same terms as a farmer would about a draft animal, what she feels for you is not love. In fact, she does not recognize you as human at all. Love comes from shared vulnerabilities. It comes from being strong for your partner, which requires recognizing his emotional needs in human terms, not animal terms, and allowing them to describe your decisions. This is precisely why women in the surrendered model of both secular and Christian relationships, because I'm not just talking about Christian relationships, these dynamics happen in secular relationships as well, do not love. Not only will a man's entire emotional landscape revolve around such a woman, no matter how much he serves her needs in exchange for her submission, she will never love him. She may respect his role as sacrificing for her needs, but she will never respect him. This is an especially dangerous system for men, because it is only the benevolence and forbearance of their female partners that prevents them from being sent to the glue factory. It's only a woman's love for her husband that prevents her from sending him through the shredder in a divorce. And a human being cannot love a draft horse.